Hello, Shirley Adams here with the Sewing Connection, Series 14, Program 3. Long ago, when scissors were invented, sewers must have experienced a giant leap forward. Then the rotary cutters came on the market, making some jobs even easier. Well, good things just got better. What I have here is kind of a new little thing, gadget, a wonderful sewing aid or cutting aid. And what it is this board that's, about 18 inches wide and about, 13 inches long. And what it has in it is slots all the way along. Now it has its own cutting board, and I could have had it down on the table, except it's a little hard to see there. So we've moved it over on a background just so you can see it more easily. But it is hinged up here by a couple of screws. It's very flexible. And what's nice is it has all these slots every ½ inch. So with these slots, I got to thinking, gosh, that would have made things a lot easier when I have been cutting in the past some difficult fabrics, those that slip and slide, and it's hard to hold in place. Here's an example of one that's really slippery, and not only is it slippery, but also it bounces. So if you would put a ruler on and use the rotary cutter and cut it, every time you lift that ruler, everything comes loose. So what I like about this is the fact that I can put it under here and hold it all in place and cut many strips without moving anything off the top. So it makes the job easier. Now what I have for some slippery fabrics, I pin them here and there and just make sure I don't run over them with the rotary. But other than that, it's just fine to have them pinned. Well, some of the things I'm going to cut, I want you first of all to look at a model wearing something just gorgeous. What you see is this vest, and it is in turquoise and purple. It's mostly silk with a little bit of velvet in, and notice how all these multi-squares in it, Seminole quilting of course, or similar types of piecing. And notice how all these little squares are only about ½ inch. And so because of that, the whole square was cut 1 inch because there'd be a ½ inch seam on each side. And there must be just tons of them there. Well, she has all those pretty little squares. And then she also has some stripes, and they might vary anywhere from 1 inch to down to ½ inch. And then there's some other piecing where there are only ½ inch pieces. So that had to be a total of ½ inch. 3/4 of an inch, I guess it would have been, so that with the seams on each side, you'd end up seeing just a ½ inch. Well, anyway, this is by Priscilla Kibbe of Wolcott, New York. And she did a wonderful job on this. Now, she's had this a little while, and it was before the Strips Ahoy came on the market, but this would have made the job a little easier. Notice also, of course, if you have scraps left over, she's going to have a cummerbund made out of the scraps because you have to use it all up when you do all that extra work. Well, I decided I was going to do something similar to Priscilla's. So here I have some strips down here, and these I've already cut and joined. And I found working with silk this way, it is so terribly ravelly. With only ½ inch seams, it's going to fall apart very quickly. So what I did after I stripped this and stitched it together, then immediately, before any more could fall apart, I put a sheer fusible on the back of it. And after that fusible's on, then you can easily cut it however you want. Now, I didn't do the other end of it, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'll just fold it over somewhere in the middle, maybe about, I won't either. I'll just put it in as it is. But of course, anytime you're doing something like this, do several thicknesses. Don't do just one, because it would be easier to do several. Now, this would also be easier if I had the open part facing toward me, but so that you can see the measurements and so on. I'm doing it with the open part facing you. And in order to get this done, remember I said that a lot of her little squares were just ½ inch. And so if that's the case, then I want to cut these 1 inch so that we leave the room on each side for the seam allowance. And so what's easy about this is that each of these little slots are just ½ inch apart. So 2 slots, I've got 1 inch cut there, and that'll make it very simple. There's a little anchor too that goes with this. And I want to cut in this slot, so I'll put the anchor over in that one. And that just holds everything firmly in place so that nothing will move as I cut this. And then I'd move down 2 more slots, 1, 2, and make another cut. And so all of this could be done, pretty quickly and easily without looking at exactly where the ruler is. And everything is just kind of easy with this holding it. Now what's also kind of difficult, this made it easier by having that backing already on it too, so that makes an easier cut, the fact that I have that. What she did, of course, with it then after she had all this done is go ahead and piece it however you want to. And this is just kind of fun to arrange and see the different things it will do up and down, or however you're going to do it. After Priscilla had it all stitched together, then of course she put it on the bias, and we have nice little bias lines here so that you can do that. There are 45-degree lines, and she then would have just put this under it and put it up next to one of those 45-degree lines, and with it there, then she could cut off the end and make a nice straight line over here so that she could do a seam by just cutting down one of these slots and doing it that way. Now I'm going to just cut off points here, but that's quite all right because I will include everything else in the seam allowance, so it really won't show. But this does make it a whole lot easier if you can just move it down and do the job in a hurry by doing multiple slices there. Well, where I found that it could be very difficult, again, I'm working with the most difficult fabrics here just to show you that it does make the job easy. But here's a real bear of a fabric because it moves all over so easily. It's a slippery rayon. And first of all, if you're going to cut bias strips, you're going to have to get a bias cut in this. And so what we do to get a bias cut is just put it under the plate along one of those 45-degree angles and make that cut first. Now, of course, with these slots, you can only cut in a straight line. And so once I get it all placed in here, I'll cut a straight line. Now, this is very crooked to begin with. This has been cut a little crooked there. I have it pretty straight now. But once you get it in there, and once you cut a straight line, and also if I would fold this, I could cut a longer slice because cutting a really long slice is always somewhat of a problem. But anyway, you get the idea. All I'd have to do is cut one slice on the straight, since I have this on the 45-degree line. Cut one of them straight. That gives me a straight line. Then I can start folding as I had that original piece a while back. Just fold it so that this bias line is straight. And depending on how wide the fabric is, how big the fabric's going to be, you might want to fold this in several thicknesses because, of course, the rotary cutter is going to cut through several thicknesses at once. So anyway, you'd straighten all that up and get it all in place, and it would be easy to make those multiple cuts then. Some that I had here for the silk, you can see that I do have this all folded on the bias, and I already have pins along so that I can make as many cuts here as I want and hold things in place so that nothing can move easily. So think about that with slippery fabrics. You wouldn't have the problem on others. Another fabric that I have here is this cotton, and of course cotton's going to be easy. Remember several shows back, or several series back, about in series 10, 11, 9, somewhere around in there, I did some scrap baskets. And here's one little one. I did some big ones too. The big ones I don't have. I had friends who talked me out of those. Well, anyway, what this is just a lot of strips of straight cut fabric, and then it's wrapped around something like upholstery welting, and then you zigzag it on machine to build these baskets. So they're quick, easy little projects to do. If I just have a few minutes in my sewing room here and there, I really like to have some of this all cut. If I just have a few minutes to spend to do something worthwhile, then if I have a roll of fabric already cut, I can just keep on and make a basket bigger and bigger that I've already started previously. Those baskets are kind of fun because you can use them any size. It doesn't matter how big or small they are. It doesn't matter how straight this is. It'll never show once it's rolled around there. So what I do to cut this just on the straight is put it under here, and I want all those strips to be 1.5 inches wide. So again, very easy. Count 3 slots over and you've got 1.5 inches. So I'm going to put this not here because this is where I want to cut. Put it in the next one to hold everything in place, and then just do a strip here and take it down 3 and do another strip. And anyway, very quickly I'd have many of those strips all cut and ready to go. I want to show you something else that has straight strips cut pretty much the same way. And this is another pretty vest. This one is Maria Montgomery, and she comes from Victoria, BC. I was doing a seminar up there when she was wearing this, and I thought, isn't that pretty? Isn't it striking with all this black and just all the prairie points in between? Well, this is all done front and back, just a really pretty thing. Notice how the lining matches so perfectly. In fact, she possibly got her color combination by buying that print lining first and then using those colors to go with it. Well, anyway, this is how Maria did her thing. She again cut these strips, and after all her straight strips were cut, then those prairie points were just a matter of cutting, and I noticed that the size of them was approximately the size of these notes that you always have by your telephone or wherever you need some quick little notes. It's about that size. So I discovered that, okay, that is about 5 slots wide. In other words, that's about 2.5 inches. And I'll put it down here so that you can see it's 2.5. It is not, it's 3 inches. Okay, so with this 3 inches, then it also is easy to just cut some along the 3-inch line, the 6-inch line, the 9, and so on, and cut a whole lot of these all at once so that you could mass produce these prairie points very easily. And how you make these prairie points, or how Maria made these, is to fold that square in half first, just along the diagonal, and then you fold it again, once again, so that it looks like this if you want to, or the other alternative is to fold the 2 outer sides so that they come to the center. And once you have it folded like that, you can cut off the center. In fact, this one she folded crosswise and then folded it down, because if I would do this one like that, I'd have to make another cut and have a real little tiny prairie point about half the size. So think about what the size is going to be and how you want to fold that. So the initial fold would either be this way if you wanted the fold in the center when you finish, or it would be diagonally if you want to just fold it and not see that fold at all anywhere. Either way will do. The wonderful thing about sewing or doing any of these is there's no hard and fast rule. You can just do this however you want to. Well, this is how Maria did hers then. It's that quilt as you go type thing where she had a base fabric and she would put a strip down, put a second strip over it, stitch that down, and then flip it up. And it's just that constant flip and stitch. Then she'd perhaps put some prairie points someplace, put another strip on top of that, stitch it, and then also that would be flipped up and the prairie points would show down below. So a really pretty technique, one that you could do very, very quickly, amazingly fast, and come out with a really nice project. Put another one down here. So you plan in advance where you want those colored little arrows to show, and do something accordingly. So just a little idea. Now I'm going to be showing you a lot of these ideas during this series because you've told me in the past you really like to get ideas from what other sewers have done. And so most shows will have a few other things to show you that people from around the continent have done, and gives you an idea, something that you can perhaps do in your sewing room. Maybe you want to do some of this cutting at an unusual angle. And here is something I was trying to see how it would work. How about some giant rickrack? And I was trying it on paper first because I wanted to see, okay, do I want it this big, really a giant rickrack? Do I want it smaller? Do I want it narrower? How do I want to cut this? And so the idea is you simply accordion fold a piece of fabric. Here I have paper, just in order to try it out. And it's not a bad idea for you to do that. And once you have the paper, you'd want to, or fabric, whichever you have folded, you'd want to put one edge of it, the straight edge, right along the 45-degree angle. And then when you do your cutting, you'd cut through one of the slots, and of course it would then just produce a nice piece of rickrack, however you cut it. And here we'll pull it out and see what we have going. So this rickrack came out about like this. I would recommend cut a piece on paper first to see what it is you turn out with, and then you can decide to do this with fabric or how to do it. The spacing and the size of the folds, all the variables. Now if I would be doing this on For instance, a cotton here, a woven cotton, I might want to fuse that down first because it's going to be a lot easier to sew on wherever I put it. So what I've done with this is, first of all, fuse the whole back side of it with some of the fusible release sheet, that, the fusible web there that you then peel off the paper after you have it fused on, and then you can put this down on whatever the project is and fuse it again, and just have a nice piece of rickrack. I can see this perhaps on a picnic tablecloth or something fun like that, where you really wouldn't have to finish the outside because probably the fusing would hold it in place sufficiently that you wouldn't have to worry about ravels. A perfect place to do that, though, might be also with some of the suedes, some of the man-made suedes, especially the thin ones, because you could cut through those quite easily. Now what I've done is fuse this and then cut it, and it's all ready to go, and of course you wouldn't have to stitch this down at all, or at least you wouldn't have to satin stitch over the edges, since it'll never ravel. But if you're using anything heavier than this, you might want to instead think about just using, without the fabric, just cutting after you folded the fusible material, the fusible web. Just do that in the rickrack shape, then press it on the heavy fabric, and you'd have to individually with scissors cut along each zig and zag until you got it there. But it's another thought, something you might want to try. Maybe you'll remember back, about 2 series ago, in series 12, there was a fun little bog coat. I wish I had that to show you, but I don't. Some child who needed that is now wearing it. And so I don't have it anymore, but it was in the Series 12 book. And here's what it looked like, these little heartwarmers. And it had a shaggy fringe around the edge, and it had a shaggy fringe where top meets bottom, the way you do a bog coat where it was all put together. Now I did all that with scissors because I had first sewn on a strip such as this. I had just sewn the strip on, and then after it was done, I took scissors and cut all that fringe. It could just as easily, in fact a lot more easily, be done in advance. Now if you want to cut a fringe, think about it. You don't want to cut that strip all the way through. So what you would do with that is just put this partially inside and decide how long you want the fringe. But if we just want, a couple-inch fringe is what I'm going to have here, a little bit more than 2 inches perhaps. But if I would do this, it would just be a matter of, when I come down to the bottom of it, it won't let the rotary blade go any beyond that. Therefore, it's kind of a quick job. It's a real quick job to just go down each one, not have to worry about measuring anything, and it's just every ½ inch we've got a strip. Now if you want this to be thinner, like every ¼ inch, after you cut all this, you'd have to pull it down. Some fabrics will do that, others won't too easily. But if I would, for instance, just pull it down about halfway, and it's hard to see where I have cut those slices, but if I'd pull it down approximately halfway, then it would just be cutting the in-between strips, and instead of having the ½ inch cut, I would come out with ¼ inch cuts. So that would make a nice fringe too, and be just very easy to do on some project, such as that little bog coat. Now think about how you want to do fringes. I'm going to do mine so that they are about a ½ inch wide, but you have to think of what direction they're going to be. I'm going to show a coat here that was made by, isn't this some kind of a coat? This is Kathy Carroll of Wichita, Kansas, and isn't that a great coat? Now this is going to keep her warm, all that shag up on top. She has named her coat Simba for obvious reasons. See the lions in the jungle down below? And then notice how she has taken that jungle fabric and just borrowed all the colors from it and cut straight pieces or solid pieces of fabric. Well, this is just a real cute coat. And here's kind of the idea. If I would, for instance, have these solid pieces of fabric that went with a print, this would work out well. But what I want you to think about is which direction you're going to do it, whether on the straight or on the bias. I noticed that Kathy did hers on the bias, and I'm going to cut some both directions here all at one time to show you why in a second. With this denim, I have some of these on the straight, 2 layers on the straight and 2 layers on the bias. And as I cut these, here's what you have to think about in advance and try in advance on your fabric. because I find that the bias cut one, is this the straight or the bias? This is the straight. I can stretch it and nothing happens, so this is the straight. Now what will happen with this after it goes through the washer is it'll get a little shaggy. You'll have some things hanging out all over, and that might be a real nice look if that's what you want, but decide what you want. The other alternative is here it's cut on the bias, and these, after you wear it a while, you might start losing some of the shag because on the bias there's nothing to hold it. In this denim, should I admit to Kathy, I actually tried pulling one of hers to see what would happen, and on that closely woven cotton that she had, nothing happened. So it's all right on that. It won't pull off, but you better try it on a little sample first to see. I also want to show you a couple of vests of mine that you're going to be seeing actually in the next couple of programs that we have. But you can see I did a lot of cutting in these, and these are all bias tubes that go into these woven vests. And these tubes on the pink and the brown and taupe one, they are mostly satins, and so they're again slippery fabric, a little bit hard to cut. Then I have another vest there with really difficult ones. These are chiffons and see-through, very thin fabrics. And so I was very thankful to have this Strips Ahoy for that because it did the job very nicely, holding it all down so I could cut a lot of tubes all at one time. But for making fabric tubes, you just can't beat it. And I wanted those actually, especially, well, on both of them, I wanted those two vests to have tubes in all widths. So some of these strips I cut maybe as much as, I think I have some of those chiffon strips that were actually cut about 5 inches wide, and then they're crushed together as they were pin woven. Well, those wide ones I actually cut 10 inches, and of course the marks are all here along the bottom, so you can easily see those. They're also all here along the side, so you know exactly what you're doing every place. But it was nice to have those, and I cut that real quickly, just some of them narrow, and then I'd skip over many and cut some of them wide, and so that just made it very easy. Then we have another coat that I'd like to show you, which is fun. Well, let's first see this t-shirt. And this t-shirt is by June Grieg, and she's from St. Louis, Missouri. She's a very clever lady, and you're going to see several of her things throughout the series. But what she has done here is simply make a t-shirt, and this is an exterior facing that she has. And that facing was sewn to the inside, flipped to the outside, but first, before it was even applied, it had all that fringe cut. Now that's a long fringe. It's about 7 inches long, and it also is about a ½ inch wide. So perfect to put under this mat and cut it like that so that you have all those perfect ½ inch cuts along here. By the way, what she did with that to make it curl, after you once have it cut, you simply pull on it and it curls to the back side, and then she tied the ends in knots to make a pretty fringe. Then we also have this coat that I must show you, and this is from Martha Richard, and she's from Garland, Texas, and she does some really fun things. Now, I saw her down at the Quilt Festival in Houston, and quilters typically not only do very clever things, they do a lot of cutting, and quilters all need this kind of a mat to make the job easier for them. But also what she did notice on this coat is there is a name, I started to say, and the name of it is See One Buffalo, You've Seen Them All. So Martha likes to put some humor into her things besides doing some really pretty things. Just look at what she's done. Now what we're looking at specifically is that fringe all over it, because there is a big fringe along in the bodice as well as on the sleeves. For goodness sakes, it's out west. It needs that big leather fringe. And notice when the model moves in it that it also has some beads. They're in back of the fringe so that they're hanging there and looking very pretty. Notice all the buffalo though. She's done a pretty technique there with a lot of yarn, and she has a lot of beads in that yarn so that when the light hits it just right, all the yarn seems to sparkle. Well, it's actually a lot of beads that are in it, and she got just the perfect little beads that look like buffalo horns, so it's fun. A lot of humor is, it makes your sewing fun. You don't need just anything else that's humdrum. You need everything to be something pretty special when you make it. Well, I have another little bit here. I'm in the process of making a little purse. A little clutch bag is what it's going to be. And this purse is going to be looking like this. Again, I was just experimenting to see what would happen. Oh, let me go back to Martha's just for a second. Will you let me do that? Okay, I have some fringe here too in suede. And my first tendency was to put it in. Now remember Martha and her coat, her buffalo coat? Remember that she had kind of long fringe there? So at first I was going to put this long fringe in, fold it over sideways like this so I could cut 2 layers at once because, you know, that makes the job quicker. It's smart to do it that way. But then it occurred to me, why don't I instead do it this way? And I'll put it in so that the fold's in between the thicknesses. And I'm going to cut all this, and she wants to sew that onto her coat with something solid, so I'll leave some of it down below so that it can't all be cut. And I'll just cut the rest, and you want to line it up so that it's straight with something so everything works out just right. And then when I actually do this cutting, I'm going to do it every ½ inch. So I'll just hold it here. I'll start at this end, and after I have all this cut, I want to move it down a little bit again and cut it a second time as I did the other one I showed you a little while ago, so that you can cut it into 1/4 inch ones. And then after you get it all cut, what makes this a good deal is that you can then just fold it in half this way, put it under the mat again, cut down through the center of it, and you have twice as much fringe, so it's that easy. Either way, it can actually be done. Well, a couple of other projects I was going to show you, I really won't have time to do, but here's another one with the same idea. I'll just show you this without actually doing it. What I have here is a lot of slots just cut in the middle of this suede, and then as I stitched it, I turned each one over with a pair of tweezers, and it ends up that way. Well, now that we've cut up about everything in sight, what are we going to do with all the long bias strips that I cut? Join me next time for Tubular Treasures.